She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't even supposed to be in the room. Nina Vale was just an intern, invisible, underestimated, and told to listen and learn. But when a $30 million deal started to fall apart in front of the entire board of directors and no one had a solution, she stood up, said one sentence, and changed everything. Within 24 hours, her name was on every floor. Within a week, the CEO couldn't stop thinking about her. And within a month, she'd have to choose between the dream job she never expected and a man she never meant to fall for. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The elevators were silver, spotless, and so quiet they made her boots sound louder than they were. Nina Vale adjusted the strap of her backpack and held her breath as the doors slid open on the top floor of Ward and Lyon Strategies. Her badge still smelled like printer ink and her clipboard was empty, save for a list of names she barely recognized. She hadn't even been here a full week. Just an intern. Just here to observe. But today, the senior team had called an emergency meeting. And somehow in the rush, someone had waved her in, mistaking her for someone more important. Now she sat near the glass wall of the boardroom, heart pounding behind her ribs, while 15 people in tailored suits stared at a screen filled with numbers that weren't adding up. The Horizon proposal doesn't hold. The client's board is threatening to walk, said a woman at the far end of the table. Ariel Kingston, Chief Operating Officer. Every word out of her mouth was sharp, dry, and punctuated with her heels clicking under the table. That's impossible, someone else muttered. We spent 6 months on this. Across from Nina, the CEO remained silent. Damian Ward. Mid-30s. Cold as frost. Tailored to the bone. His jaw was clenched, his fingers steepled under his chin. The kind of man who looked like he hadn't blinked in 20 minutes. He stared at the screen as if he could will it to fix itself. Nina knew she should stay quiet. Just take notes, maybe nod politely. But the room was drowning in panic disguised as silence, and no one seemed to be asking the one question that kept echoing in her chest. She shifted in her seat. Ariel was saying something again, fast, defensive. We can't revise the pitch in under 48 hours. We'll just need to tighten the messaging, repackage it. Sorry, Nina said. It was barely louder than a whisper. The room didn't hear her. Sorry, she said again, louder this time. 15 heads turned. 15 sets of eyes blinked in synchronized disbelief. Someone even scoffed under their breath. Nina felt her spine lock up, but she kept her voice steady. I don't mean to interrupt, I've been reviewing the client's past communications. Their CEO's wife uses a wheelchair. He's made accessibility the cornerstone of every major initiative he's funded in the last 3 years. But in our Horizon presentation, there's not one mention of inclusive infrastructure. No ramps, no adaptive designs, no staff retraining. I think she hesitated. I think that's why they're hesitating. Not because of the numbers. Because it doesn't reflect what they care about. Silence. Real silence. The thick kind that settles like snow. Damian didn't speak. He didn't move. But slowly, ever so slightly, he tilted his head. It wasn't condescension. It was curiosity. Ariel's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That's speculative. Nina nodded, calm. Yes. But it fits their behavioral data. Someone at the table cleared their throat. She's right, said the head of marketing. I've got their campaign files here. Every headline's about equity. Accessibility. Inclusion. Another voice? We could pivot the proposal around that. It's not too late. Damian's voice, when it finally came, was like ice cracking over deep water. Build it, he said. Reframe the entire pitch. 48 hours. Make inclusion the anchor. He didn't look at Nina when he said it. But the message was clear. She wasn't invisible anymore. After the meeting, people didn't look at her the same way. Some with mild curiosity, others with veiled annoyance. She heard her name whispered once, then again. The intern? What's her deal? She didn't respond. She didn't need to. By lunch, she had 3 messages in her inbox, one from the assistant to the head of strategy asking for her notes, one from HR checking in on her internship experience, and one, the last, simply said, 11:30 a.m., floor 39, conference room B. Don't be late. It was from Damian Ward. She almost deleted it. Instead, she climbed the stairs. Conference room B was smaller. No windows. Just one long table and one man sitting at the head of it with a laptop open and zero expression on his face. "You're early," he said. "You said not to be late." He looked at her for a long second, then nodded once. "Sit." Nina sat. For a while, he just clicked through files. She didn't say a word. Then, "Where did you get that information earlier?" "From the shared client archive," she replied. "It's open to interns. I read the full profile over the weekend." "And you deduced all that just from reading?" She frowned. "Well, not just reading. Listening helps. I watched his interviews and his body language always shifted when he talked about his wife. He uses his platform to amplify her needs." Damian leaned back, fingers drumming once on the tabletop. "You surprised a lot of people today." "I wasn't trying to." "Even more dangerous." She stiffened. But then he added, "Most people who try to impress end up saying what we already expect." "You didn't. You saw what we missed." Nina looked down at her clipboard. "I just said what made sense." He studied her. Not in the way others did, not with judgment or appraisal, but as though she were an equation he couldn't quite solve. A problem that defied its expected outcome. "You'll join the team presenting the revised pitch," he said. Her head snapped up. "What?" "You've earned a seat at the table. Use it wisely." She didn't know what to say. So he closed his laptop and stood. Dismissed. She walked out in a daze. And didn't realize she was smiling until she reached the elevator and saw her reflection. Nina barely slept that night. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't answer, and her laptop stayed open with tabs full of unfamiliar software, pitch templates, and data dashboards. She hadn't been assigned any official role in the company's operations, but now she was part of something that could make or break a multimillion-dollar deal. By morning, her nerves were a thunderstorm beneath her skin. She arrived an hour early and reviewed every page of the revised Horizon proposal. The strategy team was already buzzing when she entered the room, but when she walked in, the noise dipped by a fraction. Not everyone looked thrilled to see her. But no one asked her to leave either. That was new. Ariel sat at the front, arms crossed, jaw set like stone. When her eyes landed on Nina, there was no pretense, only cool appraisal and thinly veiled disapproval. Nina met her gaze, nodded politely, then took a seat in the corner without waiting for permission. The meeting began. Damian entered 5 minutes in, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no tie, holding nothing but a black coffee and his presence like a storm front. He nodded once at the team and scanned the table until his eyes landed on Nina. There was the smallest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Approval? Or amusement? She couldn't tell. "Let's hear it," he said. The presentation flowed better now. The language was more human, less sterile. The redesigned slides featured inclusive design mock-ups, testimonial quotes, images that reflected lived experience rather than stock models in polished towers. And every time a line touched the right nerve, Damian would glance briefly at Nina just for a second. Not a show of credit. Not praise. Just recognition. By the time the meeting ended, no one questioned her presence anymore. What came next wasn't official, not in any memo, not in any chain of command. But people started copying her on emails. She began to receive files labeled "for your insights." Executives passed her in the hallway and nodded. Someone in finance even asked her to weigh in on how a community reinvestment clause might play in public messaging. Nina didn't have a title, but she was becoming unavoidable. By the end of the week, the client signed. Horizon was saved. The board celebrated quietly, and Damian sent a company-wide email with one sentence that made her breath catch. "Thanks to our team's sharp eye for detail and one timely insight, we moved forward." Let that be the lesson. No name. But she knew. That afternoon, he called her back to conference room B. Same table. Same silence. Same man, except this time there was a folder already waiting on the desk. "What's this?" she asked. "A collection of community-focused projects we've paused for over a year," he said, not looking at her. "I want your opinion. What's viable? What's dead? What's worth reviving?" Her eyes widened. "But an intern," he finished. "Yes. Who thinks like a strategist, listens like an anthropologist, and has better instincts than most of the people I pay 7 figures." She blinked. He stood. "I don't offer flattery. And I don't offer chances twice." She opened the folder. Inside were plans for urban gardening initiatives, neighborhood rehabilitation, subsidized housing advisory models, mental health pilot programs. Many were scribbled over, half approved, stamped, budget frozen. But one line caught her eye. "Project Lumiere, local empowerment through sustainable microgrids." "You wanted my opinion," she said, looking up. He raised an eyebrow. "This one's gold. But you're pitching it like it's charity. Reframe it as self-sustaining innovation. Local communities want autonomy, not handouts. You give them ownership, they give you trust." Damian said nothing for a moment. Then, softly, "You don't speak like someone who studied business." "I didn't," Nina said. "I was studying psychology. Before I had to drop out." He didn't press. But something shifted in his expression. "Respect, perhaps." "Keep the folder," he said. "You're leading the strategy outline." Her breath hitched. "Wait, what?" "You're not a consultant," he said calmly. "You're not staff. So you don't have to play by the rules. Use that while you can." And with that he left the room. She stayed behind, folder open in her lap, blinking at the lines of ink that, just days ago, would have been way beyond her reach. Later that week, she found herself at the company cafe on the 20th floor, hunched over a stack of printed articles when someone dropped a folded napkin on her table. She looked up, startled. Damian Ward stood above her. He wasn't smiling, but the napkin had one sentence written in clean, sharp print. "You were right about Lumiere." He turned and walked away. The next time she saw Ariel, the COO's voice was sugar-laced poison. "Congratulations," she said, arms folded in the elevator. "Intern to miracle worker in a week." "What's next?" "Chief visionary." Nina didn't bite. "Just doing what I was asked." "Oh, I'm sure," Ariel said, eyes narrowing. "But do yourself a favor, sweetheart. Don't get used to that seat. It's warm today, but this building's made of ice." The doors opened. Ariel stepped out, and Nina, pulse racing, stayed still. That night, long after the lights had dimmed in most offices, she sat alone reviewing strategy decks. She didn't hear footsteps behind her, not until a voice interrupted. "You really don't stop, do you?" Damian stood in the doorway. "You're still here," she said. "So are you." "I'm just trying to get it right." He walked into the room slowly, unbuttoned his cuffs, sat across from her. "You already did," he said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." She looked at him. Not as a CEO, not as the untouchable man in the tailored suit, but as someone who, like her, never really stopped, never allowed himself to. She didn't say thank you. He didn't need it. For one moment, they just sat there, not talking, not debating, just two people in a room, the air humming softly with something unnamed. Something new. The hallway lights flickered into night mode, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Nina stepped into the empty elevator. The folder of revised strategies still pressed to her chest, her thoughts running wild. She should have felt victorious. Instead, her pulse was uneven, her chest heavy. The higher she climbed inside Ward and Lyon, the clearer it became this place wasn't built for people like her. But she was here, and she had no intention of backing down. The next 2 weeks moved like a blur. Her days were full of conference calls, last-minute briefs, floor-to-floor walks with department heads who no longer ignored her, and long nights building proposal frameworks that weren't even in her job description. More and more often, she found herself in rooms she hadn't been invited to, and yet no one asked her to leave. Except one person. Ariel. The COO's subtle hostility had turned strategic. Nina would find herself missing calendar invites, removed from internal email loops, and handed other tasks when big clients arrived. But every time the sabotage began to take hold, someone higher up pulled her back in. Usually Damian. Not directly, he never coddled, but firmly with an unmistakable authority. The problem was people were beginning to notice. Especially the press. An online business journal ran a short article titled, "The Intern Behind Ward and Lyon's Newest Wins?" It was flattering, if vague. Nina didn't even know the piece existed until someone sent it to her at 6 a.m. and by 6:15 she was being asked to stop by HR. "This isn't disciplinary," said the rep gently. "But Ariel thinks it's best if you let comms handle all media inquiries." "I didn't talk to anyone," Nina replied, stunned. "I believe you. But optics." That word again. Optics. It hung in the air like dust in sunlight. By noon, Ariel passed her in the hallway, smiled without warmth, and whispered, "Enjoy the view while it lasts." But the day had more in store. That afternoon, Nina was called to a boardroom she'd never seen before, wider, darker, full of actual wood paneling and real oil paintings on the walls. It felt like a different planet inside the same building. Damian was already seated. So was the board. 12 pairs of eyes turned when she entered. "Miss Vale," said a silver-haired man at the far end. "We'd like your take on the investor perception of the Horizon rollout. You've become something of a case study." Nina's voice didn't shake. She gave her assessment clearly without trying to impress. When she finished, Damian glanced at her. And for the first time in front of everyone, he said, "Excellent." The room stilled for half a beat. Then the chairman spoke. "There's discussion of expanding this model. A social strategy wing." He turned to Damian. "She could lead the pilot." Ariel's jaw tightened. "She's not qualified," the COO said coolly. "She's not credentialed," the chairman corrected. "There's a difference." Nina sat frozen. Damian didn't speak. He only looked at her the way someone might look at a door they hadn't yet dared to open. After the meeting, he found her alone in the hallway. "You were remarkable," he said. She crossed her arms. "They just like a good story. They like results. You gave them both." There was a beat of silence. Then she asked what she'd been holding in for days. "Why didn't you defend me when she tried to block me from the article?" Damian didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "Because if I defend you too directly, I give them something else to use against you." Nina's expression hardened. "So you're protecting the company image?" "No," he said. "I'm protecting you. Even if you don't like the method." They stood there, unspeaking, a long thread of something tense between them. Respect? Frustration? Longing? She couldn't name it. Neither could he. Later that week, she was on her way out of the office when someone stopped her in the lobby. A man in a tailored navy suit. Polished, handsome in a curated way. He extended a business card. "Luca More, head of innovation at Meridian Partners. We've been watching you." "Watching me?" He smiled. "Let's just say we've been noticing the things you're not credited for. We'd love to discuss your future." Nina blinked. Caught off guard. He leaned in slightly. "Some places know how to recognize value. Early." She thanked him, pocketed the card, and walked into the evening air with her heartbeat tapping at her ribs. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced. She thought about her sister, who still shared a 2-room apartment with her. She thought about her mother, who used to clip scholarship articles out of newspapers and whisper, "You'll get out. You'll be more." And for a moment, just a moment, Nina considered the offer. Until an email arrived. From Damian. No subject. Just 2 lines. "Tomorrow's presentation. I want you at the table, not behind it. Your chair will be beside mine." She stared at the screen and felt everything shift again. The boardroom was packed. Investors, journalists, regional directors, brand partners all gathered for the quarterly reveal. Ward and Lyon's new social strategy division was about to be unveiled. The presentation deck had Nina's fingerprints all over it. Her data, her narrative, her voice in every slide. But her name wasn't on the cover. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Ariel stood near the front, sleek in navy, microphone clipped to her lapel, the perfect image of composure. She would introduce the presentation. Damian would deliver the strategy. And Nina, the one who built most of it, would sit silently 2 rows back. Her assigned seat. The lights dimmed. The applause began. And everything fell apart. Halfway through the event, as Damian stepped forward to acknowledge the people behind the vision, Ariel interrupted. Casually, coldly, "I believe credit is important," she said, turning to the audience. "So let's be transparent. This new direction was first inspired by our internship program, an initiative we've long championed for diversity and social mobility. In fact," she smiled thinly, "the young woman many of you have seen shadowing our teams is a former waitress, community college dropout, and currently a part-time assistant with no formal credentials. Still, she offered an interesting suggestion, and we're grateful." The room shifted. Like a ripple. Like wind passing over glass. Nina felt her throat tighten. The eyes around her weren't warm. Not admiring. Not anymore. They were curious. Judging. Damian said nothing. He stood there. Frozen. And that, more than Ariel's words, was what broke her. Not the subtle humiliation. Not the implication that she'd overstepped. But his silence. After everything, he didn't speak. Nina stood up, not dramatically, not angrily, just steadily, and walked out of the room before her face could betray what she felt. She didn't cry. Not until she reached the bathroom 3 floors down, locked the stall, and pressed both hands over her mouth to stop the sound from coming out. Later that night, she didn't go home. She walked the city streets, not knowing where she was going, until she ended up back in her neighborhood. Back where cracked sidewalks curled like questions. Back where nobody wore suits and everything smelled like garlic bread and corner store coffee. She opened the door to her apartment and found her sister asleep on the couch with a textbook on her chest. Nina stood there for a long time, breathing. Then she opened her laptop and typed her resignation. No emotion, just clarity. She didn't belong there. She sent the file. And she let go. 2 days passed. No calls. No emails. No apologies. And that somehow hurt more than the betrayal itself. On the 3rd day, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a folder. And inside the folder, her own notes, strategies, sketches, old ideas scribbled on napkins, proposals she never submitted, community models, neighborhood outreach plans. All copied. All annotated. And on top, a single post-it note in sharp handwriting. "You're more than they'll ever admit. Don't forget it." No signature. But she knew who it was from. Still, she said nothing. She moved on. Or tried to. A week later, she received a job offer from Meridian Partners, the firm Luca More represented. A real contract. Real pay. Autonomy. A community-focused innovation lab in Boston. Fully funded. And they wanted her to lead it. She said yes. Almost immediately, things changed. Her story, the intern who challenged the system and walked away, spread quietly through the industry. Some whispered. Some applauded. Damian Ward said nothing publicly. But privately? He was breaking. He didn't sleep. He started attending meetings without saying a word. He fired Ariel from the social strategy division after an internal culture review. He tore up the investor slides and asked his team one question. What are we actually doing? Not the numbers. Not the optics. The impact. No one could answer. Except her. But she was gone. And she wasn't coming back. Not until he proved he had changed, not just his words, but his instincts. His reflexes. His silence. He found himself driving, one Saturday morning, to the address she'd listed on her HR form months ago. A modest apartment on the edge of a forgotten zip code. No marble. No glass. Just a chipped red door and a doorbell that buzzed twice before her sister answered. You're him, she said flatly. I am. She told me about you, the girl added, narrowing her eyes. Most of it wasn't good. Damian nodded once. I earned that. She crossed her arms. What do you want? To see her. If she'll let me. She's not here. Will she be back? The girl studied him. Then, reluctantly, stepped aside. Come in. I'll make coffee. You can wait. He sat on their worn-out couch and looked around the small living room full of old books, drawings on the walls, and a heart that didn't need permission to matter. For the first time in years, he didn't feel big enough for the room. But he waited anyway. When Nina returned and saw him there, her face didn't register surprise. Only silence. She set her keys down slowly. I didn't think you'd come, she said. I shouldn't have waited this long. She didn't offer a seat. He stood. I failed you. In front of everyone. You stayed silent. I know. Why are you here? Because I forgot who I was supposed to be. Until I saw who you are. That caught her. Just slightly. She turned away. Her voice cracked. I can't go back there. I don't want you to, he said. I want to build something better. With you. Or inspired by you. If that's all you'll allow. She stared at him for a long moment. Then said, There's a proposal on my table. A national social equity grant. Boston wants me. He nodded. Then you should go. And if you do, I'll make sure the world hears your name for what it truly means. Nina looked at him and for the first time saw not the CEO, not the strategist, just a man finally learning how to show up. And something in her heart softened. Not forgiveness, but the beginning of it. A month had passed since they spoke in that small living room. A lot had changed. Nina's name was now listed as the national program lead for Meridian's Boston initiative. Her face had been featured in 2 industry magazines. She spoke at universities, on panels, even in a radio interview, always clear, grounded, humble. She never mentioned Ward and Lyon by name. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for itself. But something else had shifted too. From time to time, she'd receive updates. Not from Damian directly, he kept his distance, but from former colleagues who quietly followed her progress. They sent links, screenshots, whispers. Ward and Lyon restructured its leadership. Damian Ward had started visiting field sites. He created a community advisory board. The company's internal mentorship program now had her early prototype as its foundation. And then, one day, a letter arrived. Not an email. A printed envelope. Handwritten. Inside, a simple card. We're launching a new initiative. Your idea. Your name on the door. Full control, full team, full funding. And no one to silence you. If you're willing to walk into the room again, I'll be standing beside you, not in front of you. D. There was no pressure in the words. Just space. Just a door, left open. Nina didn't respond immediately. But 3 weeks later, she boarded a train back to the city for a conference. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't even book a return ticket. She just walked through the streets that used to feel like walls and now felt like something she'd outgrown. The conference was held in a downtown hall. The topic, Leadership and Social Innovation from the Inside Out. Ward and Lyon was a featured speaker. When she entered the auditorium, heads turned. But not with suspicion this time. With recognition. The moderator, a woman from the UN's Social Development Arm, smiled brightly when she spotted her. We weren't sure you'd come. I'm just here to listen, Nina said. But by the time Damian took the stage, everyone was looking at her again. Because the first thing he said into the microphone wasn't about statistics. It wasn't about strategy. It was her name. Before we begin, he said, steady, proud, I want to acknowledge the person who sparked every major change our company has made in the past 6 months. The person whose clarity, compassion, and courage made us question what leadership really means. Nina Vale? The crowd turned. She stood slowly. Applause followed. But not the polite kind. The kind that meant something. After the session, they spoke backstage. Alone. She didn't smile right away. But she didn't look away either. You didn't have to say that, she told him. I did. I don't need validation. I know, he said, but some truths are still worth saying out loud. There was a pause. Then quietly, "Why now?" she asked. Damian looked at her with none of the CEO polish. Just a man finally standing still. "Because I spent my whole career building walls to survive. And you? You walked into the cracks and made something grow there. You didn't just challenge us. You reminded me of the point, of the purpose, of why any of this matters." She felt tears pressing behind her eyes. She didn't blink them away. "And you reminded me," he added softly, "that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up in the smallest voice at the back of the room, saying the one thing no one else dared to say." Nina laughed through her tears. "That was dramatic. You're worth the drama," he said simply. Then added, "I still don't know where this goes, or how to ask for more than a second chance." She stepped forward. "You already asked," she said. "You did it by showing up. Not perfectly, but honestly." They didn't kiss. Not yet. They just stood there, facing each other, eye to eye, soul to soul, and for once, time didn't feel like an enemy. That evening, Ward and Lyon announced their newest department, Human-Centered Strategy and Impact. At its helm, Nina Vale. Damian didn't speak at the launch event. He stood off to the side, arms folded, pride quiet in his chest as she delivered the opening address. Her voice was clear, warm, commanding. The woman who once stuttered just to introduce herself in a boardroom now held the room like a symphony. When she stepped down, the press surrounded her, and Damian stayed back until her eyes found his across the room. She walked toward him, slowly, and this time she kissed him, not out of impulse, but as a promise, the kind built not from fantasy but from fire. Weeks later, she moved into an apartment 3 blocks from the office. They didn't define what they were. They didn't need to. They worked together. They walked to coffee shops after meetings. They argued over policy, laughed at inside jokes, held space for each other's pasts. And slowly, beautifully, they became not just a team, but something more. On a quiet Sunday, as they walked through a community garden they'd co-funded together, Damian looked at her and said, "I've spent years learning how to lead, but you taught me how to follow something real." She took his hand and didn't let go.